Katie.
Good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And also Katie.
Morning.
Hello, Katie. Good morning. How is Pennsylvania right now?
It's actually very nice. It's about 60 degrees and sunny, which is not typical.
Cool. Great.
Before Thanksgiving, but I'm not complaining.
And then I have Marcus, my colleague Marcus. He is talking from his home office. Hello, Marcus. Good morning. How are you?
Good, good. Good morning, Willem. It's also beautiful here, David. We're only at 50 degrees this early in the morning, but we have all the autumn color outside and it's beautiful. I'm glad you're enjoying the weather too.
Yeah, it is a very crisp morning. I went as good Dutch customs prescribe. I took my bike and it was crisp weather, but I was dressed warm enough and could handle it quite well. And we are recording this webinar. And again, welcome. This webinar will be focusing on a really cool product that David and Katie with their company, besides being the representative for Giesen in North America, they also have a very cool business, a roasting business, and I'm going to have them talk about this because we are featuring their work that went into the development of a cold brew product, a cold brew Nitro product, and we're going to do some tasting of that product. Marcus and I have been doing some research into the product, and I'm going to do a cupping session with the coffee actually that was used for this this coffee. And I see we have a nice number of attendees. I'm just going quickly through the list. I see folks from Holland, from El Salvador, US, of course, and from places far away. I can see some beautiful names that indicate these folks are probably from Asia. So welcome all. So let's dive into Colombia, Nariño. I see, hello, Johan. Let's dive into this topic. I'm going to share my screen. And now you should say, Marcus, can you see my screen? Yeah?
Looks good, looks great.
Okay, perfect. And I want to encourage the participants in this webinar to post their questions through the Q&A box. And I'll ask Marcus to keep an eye on the Q&A so he can answer some of the questions by text. And maybe, Marcus, maybe you can flag some questions that we would like to answer live through live comments. As always with these webinars, we try to keep the mode pretty informal. And so today's webinar, today's Giesen webinar, the focus is cold brew. Now, cold brew is obviously a category within the coffee industry, which has been increasing over the past 5 years quite rapidly. And I think the last time that I looked into the sales numbers here in the US, this had been growing beyond a $2 billion industry. Cold brew is so interesting because it's a ready to drink beverage if it's packaged in a bottle or in a can. And of course, cold brew is also done in cafes in small batches. Today, we will talk about the techniques that David and his team used to develop their cold brew products. And he will reveal some of the secrets of the recipes, not all, but some. And so that you, in your own environment, can also go out and recreate these beverages. I think I'm a fan of cold brew products with lighter roasted coffee that have been packaged in such a way that oxidation is minimized. And I have experimented myself to some degree with cold brew. Marcus and I have done quite some experiments. Marcus, what do you feel that we have learned from some of our experiments here at Boot Coffee Campus with cold brew?
Yeah, I think you know, just to start it, I think cold brew is so interesting to me because it really does represent, I think, specialty coffee's first opportunity for a truly convenient product when you think about ready to drink, right? Um, and having something that you can just grab, crack the bottle or the can, and get on to enjoying it. And yeah, I think, from our trials, it's the quality of the coffee matters 100%. Great coffee makes great cold brew. And we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. But I do think there are slightly different roasting approaches that we need to take. I remember 2 years ago we did trials with a very high end coffee, and we were bracketing kind of short, fast, aggressive roasts versus slightly longer, more gentle roasts of to the same basic roast color, similar development percentages. Um, and you have to be really intentional in roasting these things because the differences in the ultimate cup can be quite different. And cold brew masks some characteristics, but it also turns the volume up on others.
Yep. Now, David, I'm going to let you maybe you can introduce a little bit about your background, tell us a little bit about Giesen USA, what you guys do, and of course, please share some more aspects of your business, your coffee business, and your brands that you have been launching. David, welcome.
Welcome. So thank you, Willem, for the nice introduction, and Marcus for your time helping put everything together. So just, I guess, just quickly to say something about myself or our company. We're the agents for North America for Giesen. And we support in both sales and service for the Giesen machines. I'm here now with some of my team members, so they're, I'll introduce you quickly on the side. Katie Cates, you might have dealt with her for service and support. And Isaiah, who is also helping with sales of the machines and some of the cold brew and roasting pieces of the business. And so our brands are Mechanic Coffee, which is the roasting part of our company, and it is also the part of our company that has started in the cold brew venture that we'll talk about. And we've also have a cafe, which is very near our roaster, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, USA. And so we experiment with a lot of different styles of roasting. We have a lot of fun with our Giesen machine. And
which David, so you have a demonstration training lab, right? With some different Giesen roasting machines. Which machines do you have there?
So in our like our lab, our showroom, we have a Giesen W15, and we also have a PG1, the WPG1, which is the sample roaster. I believe you have the same one, Willem.
Yeah, I love that machine. It's like,
yeah,
it's like, it's like taking the concept of a sample roaster and taking it to a much higher level. Yeah, and I'm saying that just objectively. I'm forgetting about my Giesen hat, and I just say, wow, that sample roaster is really a marvelous piece of equipment. But yeah. And so in your training lab, besides working with Giesen clients, you also do there the roasting for mechanic and for your product development trials, right?
We do, yeah. So we do roast on that. We have some wholesale roasting that we do out of our space. So we use the equipment. We don't just have the equipment sitting in the warehouse for people to see. We actually are using it. We're experimenting it. We're developing new products.
That's cool.
It's a live working showroom.
How far are you from so how easy is it to get to your showroom and to your lab? Like how far from Philadelphia or from another major city?
So we're about 6 hours from New York City. Probably about 6 hours, 5-6 hours from Philadelphia. So they would be the closest big cities to us. Washington, D.C. is the closest. It's probably 3 hours away, 3.5
okay.
hours.
Yep.
We're pretty close to other.
Yeah, so for all of those who live in North America or in the US, you fly to Washington, D.C. within 3 hours, you're in Dave's place. You can fly to San Francisco. We are an hour from the airport in San Francisco, and you could go to Amsterdam. And then the Giesen factory that has various machines is about an hour away by car. The last time I went there, I went by bike. That was a good day of biking, but that's another story. So let's dive into today's topic. So we're looking here at a photo of what? What are we looking at here, Dave?
So the first photo is a Nitro coffee, which is out of a tap, and we sell this now out of our cafe. We have a coffee shop where this is. If you asked for a cold brew for here, this is the presentation for the large brew.
And so when you present to a client, a customer, a Nitro cold brew product, what are you looking for as a brewer, and what are some of the important details in presenting the product?
So presentation for the Nitro cold brew, we're expecting that when it is poured, it's cold. We pour it into a cold glass. When it's poured, it's also very similar to if you were to pour from a tap in a bar, or pour from a bottle where you have like a Belgian style beer, or a beer where you want to preserve the head, and the top. So you can see in the picture some of the Nitro beginning to form in tiny bubbles, and at the top it will look very similar to a Belgian style beer, or even a Guinness. You could compare it to a Guinness style beer.
David, what do you mean when you say Nitro and Nitro cold brew? How is that different than maybe the cold brew that I would just make in a brewer in my cafe?
So Nitro cold brew, in the style that we have it in the photo, how we do it in our cafe, is it's cold brew coffee that we add nitro gas to after it's brewed, so that it will change the mouth feel and the look and the texture of the coffee.
And does the nitro gas help to preserve the shelf life of the cold brew?
Yes, absolutely. So we have we serve it at our cafe in two different forms. One would be flat cold brew. A flat cold brew, we do introduce some nitrogen gas to it, which helps push the coffee through the spout so that it can be served. So it has a low pressure, but it also will help remove the oxygen and replace it with the gas that will help preserve the coffee. So it won't sour or age. It has a longer life with oxygen out of it, which we know that to be true about coffee.
Cool. So let's go to the next slide. So here we see this beautiful can, and so maybe David, I'm going to switch to my other station because I'm going to open one of your cans, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this can and what went into it and what we should look for when we enjoy this amazing product. Marcus and I had a good chance to already test this, and we compared it also against other cold brew products we have been procuring locally. I can tell you, and I'm not doing this to put honey on David's mouth, but this is probably one of the best cold brew products I've had. First and for all, it doesn't seem to have that old shoe like aftertaste. Like remember put your nose into an old shoe. Now that aftertaste you find in a lot of these cold brew products simply because of oxidation that takes place. Yeah. And so David, tell us a little bit more, and then I'll switch to my other station.
Just to say something about the can, the can was a collaboration. Obviously, you can see it's got our logo on it. When our roasting brand, part of our business started, so 2016. In the background, it's got a little photo of what was the town that we live in Pittsburgh, called Verona. It's a small suburb of Pittsburgh. It was previously a steel and railroad town. So you can see a little background that we've got from the Smithsonian Institution, and it kind of fades in. So the cold brew can is it's a 12-ounce can, which you would typically see for beer. We are experimenting still a little bit with the volumes that if we did this canning again, we would maybe decrease it to 10, maybe a little bit less than 12 ounces, but it's a 12 ounce can, Nitro can. So I don't know if we would want to get into this now, Willem, but so to do, sorry.
I think we're clean now, David. If you want to.
One second. I have a problem here. So. Okay, we should be okay now. David, continue, please.
So just to say a little bit more about the can, the entry number to get to just this amount was about 5,000. So we had to, in order to come up with the can, the label, everything that went into just to being able to can, we had to increase our volumes to be able to do and to purchase about 5,000. It's really probably 6,000 cans that you would have to start with. That would make sense to get to this level. So.
And so I just want to open one of these here. So should I just open it like a normal can, or should I shake it, or what do you recommend?
So the best way would be, in order to get the effect of the cascading nitro, would be to shake it hard.
Okay. And it's not going to explode, right?
Couldn't. So we did ship it to San Francisco. So
okay.
Not sure what they, how, you know.
I have a towel ready anyway for just in case.
And you,
right. And so I think you can see me. So it's nice. So I see a little bit of the cascading effect. There's some nice foam. So cheers.
And it's really beautiful. I poured mine a few minutes ago, and I still have a sheen of bubbles clinging to the side of my glass.
And I have had mine in my fridge. David and Katie sent us some of the cans some weeks ago, and so in the fridge you can hold these products over a long time, and actually this it just makes me want to drink more, which is a great sign, of course. And yeah. So Marcus, what kind of flavor notes do you get in this product?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's like I opened it and took a sip, and then I went like right back and took a big glug of it. It's really, really nice. And I think, you know, it has a lot of sweetness, dark chocolate. You know, I can taste a little bit of the roast, but in such a nuanced way. It reminds me of like fresh roasted cacao nibs almost. A little fruit, like there's a balanced acidity, but that works with this kind of like blood orange characteristic that I taste. And this kind of background of roasted hazelnuts, which is just lovely. It like supports all of these flavors in such a balanced way.
Yeah, one of the goals was to come up with a coffee that that was a refreshing experience, but also had a lot of the coffee characteristics at the same time. So a balance of that, but something that you would want to take one sip and then come back for another sip, not something that you felt like you had to finish it because you made the investment in, you know, the can, or just needed the caffeine. So.
Yep.
So let's go back to the presentation again. So I got the tasting notes. Marcus said cacao nibs. I get what I like about it. It's easy to drink because the flavor intensity is just enough. It's not too much. It's not like an in-your-face flavor experience. So it drinks like a refreshing beverage. And I like the there's a roasted nuts, like a dried fruit notes in the background, and that might also be related to the coffee that was used for this purpose, right?
Yeah.
David, maybe you want to give us some perspectives. We have some slides here that I'm putting up that you prepared.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Marcus?
Oh, I was just going to say that I also think my favorite part of this coffee might be the mouthfeel, because it has just a perfect combination of like really smooth, really silky mouthfeel, but it's still like in some ways like a little bit of a thinner body. It's not like super syrupy and sticky like so many cold brews. which I think that just speaks to Willem's like drinkable comment.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah. So I have some notes that we put together about the idea and what went into this for us. About 20 years ago, if you've given me any cold brew, my expectations would have been very low. And this was coffee that I had on the West Coast, coffee that I had on the East Coast. But the oftentimes the cold brew that I had, it was typically coffee that was various extractions, a lot of it very strong, not very much of it light, but I think a lot of it was over extracted. And a lot of times, my background is in coffee as a technician, so I was into a lot of different coffee houses, working on the espresso machines, and I would get cold brew when it was hot out typically. And more often than not, the coffee was recycled old coffee. It was just ways for the cafes to keep from dumping their coffee down the drain. And every once in a while, you would have something that tasted a little bit better that was very intentional, but nothing consistent. And a couple of years ago, I had what I call my cold brew God shot. So with espresso, I've had a few moments that were these wow moments with espresso that I think really made me decide that I wanted to keep in coffee. It just really got me excited about the coffee business as a career, and gave me passion. But in Austin, Texas, a couple of years ago, I had a really, really delicious coffee, and it was roasted on a Giesen machine. I'm not sure if it was that or if it was the brew method, or if it was the type of coffee that they were using.
What size of a Giesen do I see in the photo here?
In the photo, that's a 60 kilo.
Okay.
So a pretty big machine. And the interesting thing is that they were actually increasing the size of their machine, which is the reason I was in Texas to help with the installation of it. But they were actually increasing the size of their machine because the cold brew that they were doing was growing so much they needed to get a bigger machine. But I was just very impressed by the product, and amazed at what I think cold brew could be. I never had that experience before, so it really impressed me.
And let me know when I go to the next slide, okay?
Yeah, in advance. Go ahead, Will. Next one. So this photo just shows one of the ways that we began to do cold brew. It's a smaller batch. We actually started in our cafe with this smaller size, and you may use this style in your coffee shop if you've got like a smaller operation and you're beginning to grow it. But about 4 years ago, this is what we started to use in our cafe, and it quickly it became one of the top selling items in our shop. So I would just maybe add that my background is really with espresso. I've never really had any type of interest in cold brew until I had a couple very good cold brews, and got me excited about it. And we really have made an investment in the equipment and done a lot of research over the past couple of years. And you can switch it, Willem.
Yeah, David, what as you've been doing your own trials, what kind of conclusions have you come to? You had those initial wonderings. Was it the coffee that Cuvée was roasting? Was it something about the roasting style and machine, or was it something in their brewing? Have you come to any conclusions where the answer lies?
I think one of the important things is cleanliness in the process. So not having any old flavors as you're rebrewing. Consistency in what you do in the process. I just think being methodical in what when you find there's a flavor that you like, being able to reproduce that, and then being able to reproduce it as you scale up, I think is one of the bigger challenges. So just like anything though in coffee, as you grow, you want to keep the same standards as when you're small, and so consistency has been one of the biggest things that we've tried to be very thorough with as we've grown.
Cool. So your experimentation with the different product types and roasting methods, what can you tell us about some of the roasting trials that you have done and that were bringing you to this successful point with this product?
So we tried a lot of different products and roasting types and roasting styles. We finally landed on a coffee which Willem is going to help taste and give notes on soon. But we I guess this is a personal preference, but I really I like a lighter roast coffee better, because I think that especially with a cold brew, it doesn't have too much heaviness, and the mouthfeel and the heaviness isn't quite as present with a lighter roast. We've also experimented with filtration. So I think the filtration of the product is very important. Using a very small, without getting into too much detail on the brewing side of it, using more of a finer micron filtration helps in keeping the mouthfeel cleaner and more refreshing. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Great. I'm preparing the water for the cupping. David, the equipment you have been using for the cold brew, is that off-the-shelf equipment that you can just buy anywhere nowadays?
It's actually a little bit of a challenge. We've found a couple different resources, which I'm willing to share those. One of the places was it's called Keg Outlet, which you can find online. And it's basically beer equipment that's been tweaked a little bit for coffee equipment. And then one of the issues is scaling when you start to get bigger equipment. We were working with a small grinder that wasn't fast enough, so we had to make an investment to get a bigger coffee grinder, because there's so much volume that you have to grind when you increase in coffee volume. We had to increase we had to brew about 700 gallons of coffee to do our first canning run.
Whoa.
And you can imagine, to do that, do you know how many pounds of coffee we had to roast? So we had to roast and grind about 500 pounds of coffee. So to do that, we added a 3-phase grinder, Malkonen grinder, to our setup, and it's almost so fast you can't keep up with it. It's really just an amazing machine. So we had to upgrade the grinder, We also had to get bigger brew tanks.
Wow, yeah, I think we have some photos of these coming up too, David. I love that grinder. When I used to work with one, I always called it R2D2.
Yeah, that's what I call
But what we do have a panelist who's asking if you could just provide just a little more detail on the filter type or the specifications, if that's not getting too deep into the secret sauce.
it. No, it isn't. We use uh, depending on the batch size that we use, we've used a different type of filter. So in the beginning, we used a paper filter, which I believe we got from Toddy. So in the very beginning, it was a products that we purchased through Toddy. And then when we outgrew that, we basically had to switch to beer style equipment. And what we found worked the best after trying different types of metal filters, we ultimately went to a nylon. I'm not sure the micron size. Do you know that? I think it was a 3 or 4 micron nylon filter, which you can see in the picture.
That's this one, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then after,
David, if I'm not mistaken, right, your spout sits what 3 or 4 centimeters off the bottom, so you also have some gravity filtration coming
yes.
into play.
Yeah. So this is for the smaller style when we're doing, I believe it's 5 gallons at a time. So we switched to a different method doing canning because this isn't big enough. But we do use the same style bags to soak the coffee, and then we filter it twice at the end with, is it 1 micron? We go to, I believe at the end we're using a 1 micron filter, which would be similar to something that you would use for filtering water.
And what this is at the end of the brew cycle, this is this, what do you call it, the sludge
Yeah, so
that
this
remains,
would be
right?
the bottom of our tanks. The tank is about, I believe it's 270 gallons, or it's about that much. But at the very end, this is the sediment that you see at the bottom would be any of the coffee particles that would come through the nylon filtration. And so at the end, it just kind of sits at the bottom, and you know.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the coffee let's talk about the coffee that you selected for this, because that's of course the key. What can you tell us about that?
So the coffee that we used is at least the one that Willem has now is a Colombian honey processed coffee, which I think Willem can more eloquently describe the way that the coffee looks green, and then also how the coffee tastes. What I liked about the honey coffee is that when I had it hot, I felt that it had some of the brightness that I liked in coffee, but it wasn't overpowering. It was in a way that there was also some sweetness in the coffee, but the sweetness didn't in the natural part of the coffee. I didn't find that to be too overpowering either. I thought it was a very balanced, and it's I guess it was, I intuited that it would lend itself very well to a cold brew, that the flavor profiles would, even though they would change when they're extracting cold versus when you brew hot, the acidity changes significantly, but it seemed that it would lend itself well to a cold brew. And so we began to experiment with it, and we're very happy with it. We got a lot of good feedback when we served it out of our coffee shop, and then eventually decided to move forward with that as one of the primary coffees in our cold brew. It is a blend though in our coffee now. So
cool. And while you are talking, I've been pouring this coffee just to do some cupping, and I could, my notes, smelling the grounds. There's a lot of dried fruit in there, like dried apricots. I get some a little bit of honey, no surprise, honey process, but I also get some notes of some unroasted nuts. Some of those chocolate tones. Marcus, what notes did you get in this coffee when you evaluated this?
Yeah, I just was sniffing it again as well. I cupped it last night and I'm tasting it again now. And a malty quality to the sweetness, like a buttered toast, like that smell of butter is such a distinct sweet aromatic that really jumps out. Um, and there's this complexity to it that's it's like clean leather. It's like a really like fine like leather jacket or something, um, which is interesting. You know, I love having tasted the canned product first this morning and then coming back to the component coffee. I did the opposite yesterday. Um,
And here, this is some information about the coffee. It's a Aponte Royal Reserve honey supplied by Royal Coffee. And I'm almost there to break my crust. Caturra variety from the Nariño region in Colombia. And here, this is the closer up shot of the green beans. Honey processed beans tend to often come out of the process a little bit uneven, which is just the result of how honey processed coffee is being processed. And where it comes to the notes, maybe Marcus, you can do a little bit of talking while I cup these coffees.
yeah, of course. I also have a bowl here to cup, but from last night, I noticed some of the same characteristics we talked about in the cold brew. The cocoa powder, um, nougat, like a very distinct, like nutty, candied sweetness, um, but also some characters of apple and grapefruit. Um, I thought it had a very interesting aftertaste when it was hot. It was kind of bittersweet, but actually a little bit low on the sweetness, um, which I think was maybe a good call for this coffee because often the cold brew process seems to elevate the sweetness to the point that it almost can become like sticky and kind of cloying. And in this coffee, it's still very sweet in the cold brew, even though it's a little bit less sweet in the cup. Nice kind of mild, but like apple acidity. I'm gonna taste again here.
Cool. David, how did you come to select this coffee? So why is it? And I think is this your roasting warehouse, right, David?
Yeah, you can see in the picture the W15 on the left and the WPG1 on the right. So that's in the roasting part of our warehouse.
Yeah. And how did you come to select this coffee?
I mean, drinking the coffee hot, I mean, for lack of better words, I imagined what it could taste like cold.
Yep. And
now we began to experiment with it cold, and liked it. Had a lot of good feedback, and
cool.
Decided to go with that one.
Yeah, Dave, and I like what you say because I think it's the skill that roasters develop. Not right away, but it takes some time. As tasting a coffee on the cupping table or in one brew method, and having the experience, right, of knowing how that coffee might perform if you cold brew it, or if you extract it as espresso, or it's time being a valuable resource for all of us. Gaining that instinct is really important, I think, for product development as the skills of a coffee professional develop.
Yeah.
So let's look at the roasting profile. Here we're looking at the at a screen print of the Giesen roast profiler, right? David, can you talk us through this profile a little bit?
I'm actually gonna put Katie on the spot a little bit.
All right, Katie.
She's helped me so much develop this profile. And she's a little bit shy, but she's also a genius with coffee. So Katie, would you just say a little bit about the profile?
So we did try different types of roasts, shorter development time, shorter roast times overall, darker, lighter roasts. The one we ended up going with, we tried to extend the drying time and have a more gradual rate of rise.
So what does it mean, extending the drying time? What do you mean with that?
We're trying to preserve mostly the fruit notes that we saw in the hot brewed method, along with like the actual sweetness. We didn't want to accidentally overpower food by shortening up our dry time or by having a shorter development time. The profile that we ended up with is a 15% development time, and that's just taste preference. It's just what we like the best, and that's what we ended up going with.
And development time, just for the audience, just to get us all straight on that, how do we define that? It's from the start of the first crack to the end of the roast. That's the time frame of the development time, right?
Yeah. So for me, it's a kind of a preferential thing. Giesens can be kind of hard to hear first crack. So I typically go based on smell. I kind of know where the temperature change would happen with first crack, and I start taking samples from my trier, and I mark it once you can tell when the smell changes very drastically, and that's when I mark first crack. So any early poppers I don't necessarily take as the very beginning of first crack. That way the development time stays consistent from batch to batch.
Yeah. And Katie, when you say drying time as well, can you talk about how you determine that?
Drying time for me would be when it's changing from like a lime green color to just starting to turn a little bit yellow, and then up to the point where it starts to get to more of like a toasty bread smell. And I go off a smell a lot when I'm roasting.
I can't wait till COVID's over and we can roast together, Katie. I'm also very much an aromatic roaster. But yeah, does that roughly correspond then on this profile to around 6 minutes 20, or?
I think so. It's a little hard for me to see the screen, but yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah, and I'm just looking at where you made that airflow increase, right? Just after 6 minutes, which I wondered if that was a decision based on color change.
Did you increase the airflow?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so let's talk a little bit about, here we're looking at a Giesen machine. That's, I guess that's your Giesen machine. So why do you feel that a Giesen roaster is so suitable to develop profiles like these? So what's the unique part for you, Katie, that the Giesen roaster brings in?
There's a lot of really nice features on the Giesen, but I think going from a roaster where you only have a single blower motor to one that has a dedicated roast air motor is a huge game changer. You also have the drum speed adjustment available. I don't play with that a whole lot myself, but it's nice to have the ability to create really unique profiles amongst different coffees with the different controls that you have. The burner control on the Giesen is really fine. So you can make really, really delicate changes. You don't necessarily see it in the burner itself, like in the flame level, but you do see it in your rate of rise. And I really enjoy that you can make very, very nimble changes without affecting overall like scorching or tipping on your beans.
And And looking at your profile, Katie, did it look like you were using a drum speed of around just below 50 hertz? Looks like around 48 hertz or
It's
something.
the default on the W15.
What's that?
The default on the W15 is 44 hertz, and I just left it at that.
Okay.
Great.
And here, actually the coffee that I'm cupping is this coffee. So I tried to get close to the profile you used, and we had it was a slightly faster roast than what you did. I did this on the WPG1. First crack 9 minutes 32 seconds. End of the roast 11:15. Development time 1:43, and the development percentage is 15.3%, with a color actual beans 52. On honey process, the color of the beans always looks darker than it really is. That's the tricky part of honey process, because you can see on the ground, I got 77, so you can see a pretty wide gap, and that's part of that is that the pigmentation of the residues on the beans creates that darker appearance. And if I just summarize my flavor notes, there's this image I can't get out of my mind that's of caramelized carrots. That's kind of a flavor note. So you have the caramelization that I also smell on the cold brew. And then there's the carrots. That's just an interesting note. I just cannot get it out of my mind. Dried fruit, nuts, a distinct quality of chocolate, like a darker chocolate. I think from what I taste here in the coffee components, and then tasting it also in the cold brew, is an interesting, they're of course not the same, but there is an interesting relationship between the coffee component and the cold brew. Yeah. David, Katie, what can you advise clients, roasters in regards of the development of a cold brew product? So it's easy, of course, to do cold brew, relatively easy, but to do it successfully and to do it at a larger scale can also set you up for failure if you're not taking some steps into consideration. What are some of those key steps in your opinion when it comes to creating really successful cold brew products?
So I think one of the most important things is consistency and understanding if your coffee tastes good on a small scale. So if you're brewing, a couple gallons of coffee, maybe 5 gallons, why does it taste good? If you make a change, why does it taste bad? So understanding some very basic things on a small scale. If you change the development time in the roast, what difference does it make when you taste it as a cold brew? So just understanding some very basic things on a small scale, not winging it, but really understanding it. I think when you scale it and do a bigger volume, it will allow you to be able to scale it properly using larger volumes of water, or maybe changing the soak method, or changing the filtration type, or anything that you might run into as you scale to a bigger volume.
Great. Yeah, I think there's an interesting question here too that I just want to share with the panelists. One of our attendees is saying, and I'm not exactly sure what he means by this because I disagree, but the roast profile looks baked. And, I think while it's, on your profile, David, maybe we can go back a couple slides, Willem. There's, yeah, it was about a 14-minute roast time, but with only a 15% development time, I see nothing there that would indicate that that's a baked profile.
And the sample we roasted yesterday, again, I want to pull up the some of the information of the profile. So there's also nothing in this that indicates that it was baked.
Yeah, and I think. Oh, sorry, Willem.
No, go ahead.
No, and I think maybe this comment is coming from there. There is a misconception that kind of comes from one particular roasting consultant, that if you see any kind of uptick in the rate of rise towards the end of the roast, that is what baked coffee is. And so I just want to say I fundamentally agree with that disagree with that concept. That kind of a little uptick like you see in the rate of rise here at the 13th minute probably has as much to do with the thermocouple design as it does with anything happening in the coffee. And that often on Giesen's particularly, I think that dip that you see from 12 to 13 minutes can come from careful use of the trier. And introducing a little bit of cold air that hits the thermocouple. So I don't know. David, Katie, I'm curious to hear what you think about baked coffee. We might all disagree on this, but that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, Katie, do you have?
I think the proof is just in what you taste. I think that if you're looking at profiles and you're looking at the data directly, you can get really caught up in the numbers. And ultimately, it's preference and it's how it tastes. So even if you think a profile turned out badly just based on the graph, tasting it will tell you what you need to know and what you need to change. And I feel like a lot of roasters get stuck in the verbiage of how a profile is built. And it's easy to forget that some coffee reacts differently at different points in the roast. And in this particular case, like, it does not taste baked to us. But I'm understanding what he's saying as far as how it would look that way on the profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Katie. Because I of course haven't cupped the coffee from that roast either, and yeah, and I really don't care what profiles look like if the results in the cup are delicious. So
I full-heartedly agree. I would say, and I'm putting up the slide with some of the next webinars that we are organizing with Boot Coffee Campus. But there is this school of thought where roasting can only be done with a profiler and with a digitally created graph, and that's the key information. But what if your computer fails, or what if you're in a situation where you're working on an older vintage machine that doesn't have any type of logging like that? So if you're really groomed and trained to work with digital controllers only, then you might be in a challenging position when those controls are not available. And so that's why I really recommend, just like Katie also mentioned, to be in touch with the product while you're roasting it. Just like a chef, when a chef is creating an amazing meal, then the chef is smelling, looking at the food, tasting it while the creation takes place. And in my opinion, a roaster should also, besides looking at the numbers, should also be smelling the coffee, looking at the color. And that's an important part of the art that can be combined with the science, and that then leads to amazing outcomes. That's the philosophy we support here at Boot Coffee Campus and also at Giesen Coffee Roasters. So our next Giesen webinar will be not the last Friday of December, but it will be that's December. It's the December before. I think it's December 20th. Marcus, could you quickly check?
Yeah, let me just pull up a
Yeah.
calendar really
Yeah.
quickly here.
Yeah.
That is December 18th is the
Thank you.
Friday before the Christmas day.
Yeah, so December 18th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Write it down in your calendars. That's the next Giesen webinar. We're working on a really cool program to say goodbye to 2020 with a bang, and we'll announce this very soon. We have some other really cool roasting and roast profiling and cupping workshops coming up. These are all virtual programs. And so check in on bootcoffee.com, check in on giesencoffeeroasters.eu, and you can also check in on the website of David and Katie's website, giesenusa.com, but you also have your own website, which is again what?
mechaniccoffee.com. We can share them.
Yeah, we'll post these in the chat box. And so we are already over the hour. I think this was a really cool program. I feel that we only were touching the tips of the iceberg with this 2 days webinar in regards of cold brew. It will be cool. Yeah, David and Katie, it will be cool to follow you guys, to maybe with your next release of your next product to do another tasting and kind of a review of how things have evolved. And so that's it for today. Thank you all very much, wherever you are in the world. Good luck. Have a great weekend. Be safe, be healthy, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.